Okay, so we had the iPod that transformed music, and then we had like even a bigger innovation really with the iPhone, and that obviously has created by far the most successful product really in history. So we have a couple of iPhones, but let's just go right back to the beginning with a clip of Steve introducing the OG iPhone on stage. Here he is. I should have worn my turtleneck today. And I remember this point, I remember watching this where it's going, it's not just a phone, it's not just an internet device, it's not just a music player. You know, do you get it? Everyone starts going crazy, you know, and it is, of course, the iPhone. And Apple reinvents the phone. Yes, was the slogan. Obviously, pretty historic day if you look back at that from however many years later it has been. But the original iPhone really set the standard in the respect that it was released in 2007. It's by far been Apple's most successful product, and it made Apple the largest company in the world in terms of money. You have a sealed original one, Tris, but you have a couple of, you didn't bring that today, but you have a couple of other models today. Can you just tell us a little bit about those and about the iPhone itself?
Okay, so it's the very first iPhone.
So is that the original?
The very original.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay. So you have a sealed one and then you have an unsealed one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the 2007 iPhone. Still works, I may add. Amazing battery life. You can leave it turned off for months at a time because there's nothing running in the background.
Okay.
You can still turn it on again. That's really cool. This was a device that broke for everything, and I remember having one back in the day.
Can I have a look at that?
Yeah, of course, I'll pass it over.
So with the apps, this was the big innovation, right? The App Store, obviously. Because beforehand, I mean, you would play Snake on a Nokia flip phone or something. It was nothing compared to this. And this came with a bunch of Apple apps, plus it had the developer ecosystem had access to making apps before it was released, so it came with apps. Or
no, not.
I think it was a year later
really?
This is the interesting story around the first iPhone, and I think the iPod Touch came out at a similar time, but there were no apps on it. In fact, you couldn't change much about that device. Please jump in if I'm wrong, but you couldn't even change the background. Very constrained. And it was actually people jailbreaking the device that pushed Apple to bring the App Store to the device. So a lot of people, I'm trying to think what one of the first apps was that was...
iPint.
iPint.
Yeah, there was a couple of very trivial apps, but people were like, this is great, I want apps. And Apple really didn't want, at that point, I think same reason today, they want to manage and control it, which is fair enough. Maybe it just wasn't in their timeline, but they felt that it was going to run away a little bit, and that's my understanding, they were pushed into releasing the App Store at that point.
I loved iPint, and there was obviously the early games like Doodle Jump and Angry Birds. I mean, these are a little bit later, right? But you had the T-Pain Auto Tune. That was like one of the original like apps that really took off. But what's your take, David, when you see the OG iPhone? What's your thoughts, your reactions? And be careful. How much is that worth? It's not in the box, so probably not a lot, but
you'd be surprised. It's
a couple of grand.
$1,000, I think.
Grand, okay.
So it still looks really good. For the first one, I actually think from an aesthetic perspective, it looks amazing. I mean, they've still got a couple of the features that you expect, like the silence button. They haven't really deviated too much. I mean, they've removed the button now at the bottom, but that was there for so many years, and it took me a bit of time to get used to not having that, because just from a user experience. I remember when it first came out, I was skeptical because it just was very limited in what you can do. And at the time, I was working for a telephony company, which so mainly bulk MMS, SMS. And no one really predicted the amount of data that these things would consume and how they would actually replace traditional messaging within the telephony. So, I don't know, I think from that perspective, it brings back memories on how do we actually pivot a company really quickly within a year or 2 years to be able to take on a device like this.
The silence button is interesting because they haven't really changed that, but leaks suggest that they will with the next iPhone, in that it will be, rather than like a little switch, it will be a button which you can use as an action button. And with the volume, that will no longer be two buttons, that will be one long button. These are obviously rumours, but they're coming from trusted sources. Ian, what's your take when you see the OG iPhone?
It is still a great design. It's quite incredible. The icon, I mean, they look dated, but they don't look bad. They haven't aged poorly. It's almost like something you put in a museum. And the form factor is quite the same. I can't believe how small it is. In my mind, it was about this big, so it's much smaller. And I'm trying to think who else had mobile browsing? I know you mentioned BlackBerry when you came, so they did have it, but I just remember
that's
it
for
really
email.
bad.
I mean, that was like the only use case really of a CrackBerry. You know?
Yeah, I remember it being quite a poor experience as well. Whereas the mobile experience in this felt full. I don't want to get carried away. I don't know what you can open on that, but it felt more low powered rather than entirely constrained. Some of the other ones would just omit certain features.
I remember the big debate about flash and no flash. That was like such a big thing, wasn't it, back in the day?
I remember. So there was the N95 was the major phone, and it had GPS, 3G, I think, as well, and it was obviously a T9 configuration. But interesting thing, obviously, with that is it was full web browsing. It was a desktop experience
on a phone.
On a phone, whereas it was WAP sites on the other phone.
It was WAP, exactly. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned Flash, because when this was released, I was working as a Flash engineer, maybe a manager in Flash engineer, I can't remember, but it was like the worst bit of news. It was just as I was changing jobs, and they basically they killed it, very quickly. I mean, on that, I think, you see the web now, it's very much Flash-like, but all closed, all open source, and Adobe missed a trick there. But I think it's been the right thing for consumers overall. The web experience now on mobile is outstanding.
Well, one thing that the iPhone really created was the hype which I've never seen before on a product in history. So we have a clip here of people literally sitting and waiting in lines for the store to open for people to be able to purchase this. So this is I think it's in NYC, and it's just lines and lines of people camping, people sleeping, people waiting, people desperate to get their hands on it. And I mean, that's what the events created. It was such a hype, it was such an allure, it was such an attraction to get it, which you didn't see this with Sony, you didn't see this with Microsoft, you didn't see this with Dell. So what are your thoughts on, I suppose, the hysteria around it all, really? What's your take, David, on that?
So have you ever read Simon Sinek's Start with the Why?
Yeah, it's a classic book of
absolutely.
Business.
So in there, he really hits the nail on the head that Apple and Steve Jobs really started with the ambition of the why. Yeah. So what is this that this product's really going to achieve for you as an individual, and what is the real problem it's going to solve? And in there, he really does talk about the early adopters and how they really resonate with the why of a company. So the branding and Steve Jobs, even if it might have been another company that had a similar product, they were just so good at hitting that nail on the head.
Yes.
And I think that was the sort of special ingredient for sure.
Yeah. Weak companies talk about what it does. Good companies talk about how they do it, but great companies talk about why they do it. And Apple is, we believe that the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. If you hear something like that, you're like 1,000 songs in your pocket. You're like, sign me up, I'm interested. Whereas if you have somebody from Sony going on stage saying, here's the specs, here's what it, here's the technical functions, here's what it can do. It's, light years away, aren't they? So I think that the golden circle, the start with why, it's a really, really good point. What's your take, Tris, on the line, on the hype, on the enthusiasm behind that Apple can create?
So I think it's quite interesting. I remember queuing up to get the iPhone 4.
Did you wait in line to get it?
So I waited in line to get the iPhone 4 for about 5 hours, 6 hours, and I remember getting it, and then it did deliver the hype because it was actually a proper decent camera. Yeah. And that's the thing I think people don't think about with the original iPhone is also it was a camera in your pocket. You could just take those pictures. But I remember having Sony Walkman phones before that, and each week there'd be a different Sony Walkman phone. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was a big thing about Steve, how when he came back to the company and they had loads of products, he just killed so many of them and said, look, we're going to do a few things better than anybody else in the world, and rather than trying to do everything poorly, specialization, right? And I think about the lines that really interested me and I always found funny was there's a clip on YouTube of some kid who queued up to get an iPhone, and the second he got the first one, the second he opened it with so much excitement that it fell out the box and smashed onto the ground. It's like the most painful moment ever if you had waited for days to do that. What's your take, Ian, on the hype around the queues? What Steve and even Tim can still create? What's your take on that?
So the hype was justified. I think, as you were saying, it's not quite better. It's more focused on solving the problem. So there were maybe better cameras. There were maybe faster CPUs, bigger screens, but everything, as you already said, was about what the consumer, what the user was trying to do with the product. So the camera was good enough to get a good picture and then, post it on the internet, whatever it might have been. So, they just did that so perfectly. You reminded me as well about the attention to detail. So you probably know this story already, but it's quite quite an interesting piece about Steve Jobs calling someone from the Google design team because the color on the Google Maps icon wasn't quite right. This is like 3 days before the announcement. It's like the yellow on the O wasn't as it should have been. Not sure if that was not quite on brand or not actually accurate for the Google logo, but either way, he called him. The head of design was like, is this really Steve Jobs? You know, it's kind of very, very odd call. He's like, yeah, you know, can you get me a new icon ready for the launch? And it was just... That might seem really minor and really particular, but that's like, you know, all of those things together are what made a great product, and he knew that. I don't know if that sense of you know, unification is there today. I don't know where the product's going to go. He was obviously a great individual, a bit difficult to work with by all accounts, but a great individual. So I don't know if Tim holds that, and from a design point of view, where they're going to go.
He's got a different philosophy, right? He seems to be very into fitness and other areas, whereas Tim and Steve and like Johnny Ive, they were like, design was everything, and you could see that. I don't know if you've read Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, but there's some great pictures in that book of Steve when he moved into his first house, when he finally became rich, and he had this huge mansion, and it was just empty, no furniture. It had one lamp from Tiffany's. He had a bed that he was sleeping on the floor. He was worth like 400 million, and his sense of design was so obsessive that he couldn't find it took him years to find a sofa that he liked. So for years he had no sofa, for years he had no tables, just because he couldn't find one that he liked. Even in the you know, when he was on his deathbed, he was taking off the oxygen mask and giving recommendations to the doctor about how it could be designed better. So you know, he was obsessed with that and you could see that in the minimalism, in the Buddhist philosophy that read through it, that less is more. So yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for Google engineers at like 3 a.m. to get a call from him to offer suggestions and changes. You've got other iPhones as well, Tris, with you today. Can you just tell us a little bit about the other ones that we've got available, please?
So this is the iPhone 3G, and arguably this is what really started it all, because the original iPhone was on sale for, I think, almost less than a year.
Okay.
And then the iPhone 3G came along, and that was iPhone OS 2.
Okay.
So it had the App Store, so they'd moved away from just adding web apps to your home screen.
So no iPhone 2?
No.
No, okay, yeah, because they skipped the 9 as well to go straight to the 10 for the anniversary. So they've got a liberal sense with numbers, really, don't they?
It was particularly targeted at the change to 3G. Yeah. I think the first one was 2.5G Edge.
So this would be Edge, and then be referred to as 2G, and then the 3G they really marketed it as a 3G phone, because 3G was obviously new then.
Okay.
And it also included GPS, so for the first time you could find your way around on the maps.
So you had Google Maps on it?
You had Google Maps, yeah.
The first one had Google Maps, but it was based on cellular positioning, or because I'm sure they had it.
Or LBS.
Wi-Fi triangulation
services, right?
Yeah. But and it seemed to work pretty well, so I don't know. Anyway, they've always been quite good on that.
So what I remember is I had the original iPhone, and then the first week of university when I started, this had just come out and I got it.
Okay.
Actually finding where you are on the map, GPS, here's where I am, and figuring it out was just a game changer. I think it used Wi-Fi triangulation before, so it could be kind of hit or miss. If you're in the countryside, there's no Wi-Fi to triangulate you, then you're in a lot of trouble. But Google Maps shipped as a system app for the first 5 years, I believe. So it was...
Okay.
And a game changer. So yeah.
So do we have any more iPhones, or have you got?
I bought these two for now because I thought they were kind of.
Do you have an iPhone in your pocket, like one that you're using day to day? Because you've always got the latest. So is this the newest?
This is the 13. I've not upgraded yet. I'm waiting for the 15.
What have I got? I've got like is that a 10 or 11 or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you look, the size difference between these. So
show the size of this one.
Unbelievable.
See, the maximum size is the same as the largest iPhone now, and then these are the sizes. It's absolutely wild.
That's insane.
Also, if you hold one of these up to an original Game Boy is about the size of this phone. So
it's much more chunkier, I remember.
Much more chunkier, yeah.
Google just released, like 2 days ago, the Pixel Fold, I think they're calling it. And there's a trend from like the original iPhone to the Google Fold, which can become a tablet, essentially. They're just getting bigger and bigger, aren't they, phones? And I think we've reached the optimum point where I don't see it getting any bigger in terms of what you can hold in your hand like this, but there seems to be a folding mechanism which is going to, turn it into a tablet, which poses an interesting question, right? Because folding phones seem to be like something that people didn't really, like a gimmick a couple of years ago. We had all the cracks in the screens. Yep. But now that Google are getting into it, are we going to see an iPhone that can fold? What do you think, Tris? Because you're the Apple guy.
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I've seen the Google product unveil for the Pixel Fold.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that struck me was the price.
How much was it?
So it's £1,800.
Okay, that's pretty pricey. Yeah,
so that is quite a high end foldable phone price. And I remember when the original iPhone came out, it was £300 on contract.
Oh wow! Okay,
we looked into a 1 year contract. So
that's very cheap.
It's very cheap, like looking back at it. But Apple have over the years normalised it. So with the iPhone X, it was £1,000. With this phone, it's 1,100, and it's progressively getting more. And I think it's astonishing. They're normalising that price, especially on a Google phone as well. So.
Do you chaps see a folding iPhone being a thing? If you had to do guesstimates, do you think that's out of the question, or do you think it could happen? What do you think?
It's an interesting question. I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that particularly want to distract you away from their iPads. Or the tablets that they might have.
Maybe, because that is kind of a tablet killer in some respects, isn't it? Why would you need that if you have a phone that can do 2-in-1? What do you think?
It's interesting. I actually watched an interview with Pitchar, Mr. Who's the Beast was interviewing Pitchar, and he was talking about folding the Pixel and the fact that folding phones, even it was interesting. I don't know if it was a good idea in reviewing this. He's got an £800 phone out, but that the folding phone is an intermediary. Where are we going to be in 3-5 years' time in terms of interfaces? But they do need to get bigger. I think the tablet, even though the iPad has been a great success, I don't think they've continued to have growth. I mean, maybe you can tell me, but I think it's very limited to particular use cases, because if you've got a laptop, you've got a phone, taking a tablet out with you as well is a bit of a pain in the ass. So
I mean, they've done the iPad Pro, haven't they? And one interesting thing is they've just put Final Cut Pro onto it. So the device for consumption, which you use it for watching video and playing games, is now becoming the device for creation. And you are going to be able to start, with a pencil and everything, and making art, making movies. But yeah, I mean, iPads, are they continuing to be made and grow, or are Apple focusing more on the other side?
And I think with the original, not the original iPad, but iPad 2 onwards, I think they did too good a job.
Yeah.
Because they don't die. They're good for 1,000 cycles at least. And you find, your gran still got her iPad from 5 years ago and it keeps working. So then the opportunity to sell someone a new iPad is diminished.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen the software evolve. I think the software is the main problem with the iPad. It hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't really changed since the original iPad, and it's kind of a bigger iPhone still. It's not kind of grown into its own product. And from Google tablet perspective, they've just kind of followed suit.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.